Number 1. For context, this took place when I was around 16 years old. I'm 24 now, so it's been a while. But this was one of the many stupid things that I've done in my life where I could have ended up dead, or even worse. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, and me and my friends would often go to the Lloyd Center to go shopping or just to hang around the food courts, being degenerates. I was walking around the mall with my friend Crystal and my mum when a man at a pop-up kiosk stopped us. He said that he represented a modeling company and wanted to talk to us about modeling for their clothing line. I considered myself better looking than the average duck. Spoiler alert, I'm about as plain Jane as they come. So I promptly announced that I wanted to sign up for the modeling agency, which my mum quickly shut down. I replied with, "You suck, mum," which got me in trouble later down the line with both parents. But that was only the start of my woes. I convinced my mum to allow me and Crystal to go off on our own, and with a reluctant sigh, she allowed us to go off. Me, being the dumb kid that I was, marched right back over to the modeling agent and signed myself up with my phone number and email address. He said that he would be back in contact with me shortly to set up an interview with the company. That very night, I went home and saw that I had a friend request from someone that shared no mutual friends with me. Hesitantly, I added the person, and a message popped up. "Hi, I'm such and such from the modeling company. You signed up with our agent earlier today, and I wanted to get in touch with you. I know you're in the Portland area, so we wanted to set up an interview with you next week at 9 p.m. at this location. Are you able to come speak to us?" I responded with a maybe and logged off my computer. That's when my phone started to ring. I picked it up and it was yet another guy from the agency. Mind you, these were all men, who asked me whether or not I could come and do the interview. I said maybe and said bye to him. It was about here that my gut instinct started to kick in. Why would they set up an interview so late at night, at 9 p.m? I googled the address, and it was an industrial park by the airport. I chose not to answer the onslaught of emails, Facebook messages, and phone calls that I was getting. This went on for about a week before I got radio silence. The guy on my Facebook blocked me. There were no more emails or calls. And it was at this point that I began to worry. What if I had allowed my career to not even blossom, let alone flourish? What if I had made a mistake? I was already in hot water with my father for telling my mum off at the mall the first time. So, with school on my mind, I allowed the idea to fade from my mind of what could have been. About 2 weeks later, our home phone started to ring. My father answered the phone, and as soon as he started listening to the message, his face became ashen, and he instantly hung up the phone, turning to me to demand what the hell I'd been doing. I tried to feign innocence, but I knew the jig was up. We had just gotten a phone call from the Portland Police Department to warn our family about a ring of sex traffickers who were targeting young girls with promises of modeling and acting. They had stumbled upon the name of one of the men who worked for the ring, and through that, started contacting families of young women whose information they had gotten a hold of. The worst part of it all, they had my family's address and home phone number. I was grounded for the rest of the year, which was to be expected, but it was better than being carted off to some sex ring, so I couldn't complain. When I was finally allowed back to the mall with my friends, we walked by the kiosk where the modeling agent once peddled his false hopes and dreams. All that was left was an empty booth. I hope I never see that man again. Number 2. This happened around 10 years ago, when I was maybe 11 or 12. My uncle and cousin had come to visit us from Louisiana. Our idea of fun at that age was going to the mall and getting some food and clothes. So my mum, uncle, my cousin's sister, who was 6, and my sister who was 7 went to our favourite mall. Since my cousin was not from the area, she wanted to go to a particular clothing store and get stuff from there. When we entered the shop, she started looking for clothes. My mum and uncle went further in to look for shoes for him. I was with my sister, and I'm usually uninterested in shopping there, so I just stood near them wherever they went. I was just looking at other people in the shop when I noticed a man, a middle-aged, greasy random dude with a backpack, staring right at us. Now, I don't know why his backpack creeped me out so much, but I just remember the way he was pulling on it and holding the straps while looking at us. He was outside the shop. The shop had glass windows, and he basically stood across from our shop, close to the windows of the shop opposite to ours. I had just started having unpleasant encounters with men leering at me or my friends as we had just hit puberty, so I was easily creeped out by people like him. But I ignored him, and as we went further into the store, I forgot about him, but still kept an eye on the people near us inside the store, in case he had decided to come in. All of us then moved on to the next store, and so on, and after about 30 minutes or so, I saw him again, staring at the 3 of us, when we were inside a different shop on the 2nd floor. He had clearly been following us, and I started to panic. I was too scared to tell my mum and uncle because they might confront him, and I didn't want that to turn into a whole thing. I kept my eye on him, and he knew that I was scared. He kept trying to move so that at all times he was in my direct eyesight wherever we went. If we got an escalator, so would he right after we get off. So when I turned to walk one way, I'd be forced to look at him. And this went on for another hour or so of him following us and me trying to shield my sisters from going his way or looking his way. I didn't tell them about it either. They were too little. My uncle then suggested that we go and get some food somewhere. Now, I love food, and especially this one restaurant in the mall, and he knew that. But I instantly knew that if we sat down somewhere and spent more time there, he'd freak me out even more. I told them that I felt sick, and I did, physically, because I hated every moment of this paranoia, and I asked them if we could go home right then and there. They sensed something was wrong, but they just thought that I was really sick, and so we started heading towards the exit. I turned to look for him before we exited, and I saw him behind us, halfway to the exit heading straight towards us, and fast. I ran to my uncle and suggested that we go to our grandpa's house instead of ours, because I was scared that he'd follow us to our home and know where we live. My uncle agreed, and we caught a cab to my grandpa's place. I definitely saw him outside the mall looking at us as we entered the cab, and I couldn't see if he also got in a cab. We left the place, and I kept scanning the road behind us to see if someone's following us. I was paranoid for weeks after that, and didn't go to Grandpa's place for a long time, in case he had followed us there and stalked the area. My heart is beating faster even as I write this. So, weird backpack wearing stalker man, please, let's not meet. Number 3. I lived and worked in Saudi Arabia for a few years back in the mid-90s. I had some crazy experiences there, but this one was the most frightening. I was in a supermarket buying groceries, and this man started following me around. I ignored him as he tried to talk to me and kept telling me Halloween Habibi, which means sweet baby, and kept asking me if I was from Lebanon. But there was something menacing about how he was looking at me. Then, he got on his phone and was talking very intently all the while watching me and following me around. And this was a big Walmart-sized store, so he was definitely making an effort, and this went on for about 20 minutes. I was very nervous at this point and checked out with my items and started to leave. And just outside the door and into the corridor of small stores, very common in Saudi markets, there was a group of between 10 to 15 angry-looking men who all crowded around me and started talking to me in Arabic. I played dumb and just kept my eyes down and kept mumbling about my husband, hoping that they would think that I was not a lone woman and let me go. People were walking past and working very hard to not look at this threatening group surrounding a woman. Just then, my amazing driver, a tiny little guy about 5 feet tall, bowed through the group and grabbed my arm and started yelling at me angrily, and then at the men. He was yelling something along the lines of, "Wife, I've been waiting for you. You're so slow and stupid. And what are you guys doing, sinful creeps?" And he threatened to call the Mutawa, which is the religious police. The men fell back and looked ashamed and confused, and Abdul dragged me out of there talking loudly about how stupid and useless I was. I just went with him and kept my head down as I tried to not drop my groceries from nerves. We got in the car and he turned around from the driver's seat to look at me and let out a big breath. He looked terrified. He said he was very frightened for me. He had seen some men gathering in the car park and knew that something bad was going down. Then he suddenly thought, "Oh no, it's WG," and ran in. He said they had been talking about taking me, and they thought that I was Lebanese, and there was very bad blood with Lebanon at that time. I'm ethnically Romanian. I pass as white in Western countries, but pass for a Middle Eastern in the East. Apparently, I have a Lebanese nose. He told me there had been some kidnappings in the last month, with the victims found burned alive in tires outside of the city. Abdul was a shit shooter, but he had gone whiter than me as he told me all this and was genuinely shaking and afraid. So I don't think he was exaggerating. After that, whenever I was sent out on errands, he always came in with me and pretended to be my husband. Huge risk to both of us. And if the Mutawa caught us, they would have imprisoned us, and he would have gotten it way worse than me. He was an amazing person to stick his neck out like that for an arsehole like me. Number 4. I work at an outdoor mall in a great neighborhood. You'd assume that it's safe as hell to be here. But then again, you just can't be sure anymore. And there are creepy people everywhere, and I just can't help shake the feeling that this isn't my last encounter with this man. I'm 19 years old, and I work at a kiosk that sells all kinds of wonky jewelry. And it's usually teens, young adults, and occasionally some older adults that shop with us. Every once in a while, this man comes up to the kiosk, easily recognizable. Same leather jacket, crinkled corners of his eyes, one front tooth shorter than the other. Same slouched way of walking. He's usually harmless, but oh my good God, the last few times he's come by have made me so uncomfortable. I greet every customer with, "Hey, can I help you find anything?" And most of them say they are just looking. He always smiles at me and says, "Just looking, darling." At first, it was fine. I didn't care whatsoever. He seemed like a harmless 50 or so year old man. He always spent a very long time looking at the display and never bought anything. Most of the time I'm working the night shift. At the kiosk, while I'm surrounded by other shoppers and other kiosk workers, mine is kind of all by itself in between two empty ones in the back. and I'm usually left alone, minus the friendly security woman that stops and chats with me on her way rounds. She comes by every 30 minutes or so, and she's one of the few friends I have at work. The only stores in my view are a Reebok and a Macy's. A few nights ago, I was sitting at my kiosk, bored out of my mind, and the security lady had already continued on her way. I had scrolled through Reddit already and was getting ready to open up Netflix and continue watching Terrace House, when I hear footsteps coming up. I look up to see the creepy man staring at me, but not actually at the kiosk yet. I wave at him, and he gives me a little smile, but one that sends chills down my spine. A customer walks up, and I immediately jump at the chance to help them, trying to shake the creepy feeling that I had. After I had checked out the customer and written down the receipt, I glanced up to see the man still staring at me. Before I could say anything, he started walking over, taking my eye contact as permission to come join me.
"Evening, darling,"
he said, doing an almost bow. "Good evening," I replied. He proceeded to do his usual checking the display and not buying anything. Instead of walking around the cart, he stayed by the register where I was. He walked behind my chair to check the sides, but never went where he couldn't see me. Then he started asking questions like we were long-term friends.
"So, darling, do you have a boyfriend?"
I kinda guffawed at that, because I've been single for over a year. I told him no, I didn't have a boyfriend, but there was a checkout girl that I found pretty damn cute at my local grocery store.
"I see,"
he said.
"Do you have any plans after work?"
he asked. I was pretty uneasy at this point, but I told him yes, I was going to a party.
"You gonna hook up with any of the boys?"
he asked. My jaw dropped. Whether or not I was hooking up with any boys was none of his business, but I just told him no. He smiled a little and said,
"Good. You're too pretty for them little boys anyway."
He faced me again and came up to hug me. Until this point I hadn't realized my heart rate increasing. It only became apparent after I found it hard to breathe. Before he could actually hug me, Linda and the security woman walked up and glared at him. "Sir, if you're not going to buy anything from this young woman, then I suggest you should go and loiter somewhere else." He stiffened at the sound of Linda's voice, because she's a very intimidating woman, and he left. "You alright, honey?" she asked. I shrugged. "He's always here," I told her. She shook her head. "Let me and Ross walk you to your car after work, alright?" I nodded, relieved that she had offered without me asking. The rest of my shift is fine. I get through it and manage to make my bosses a bit of money. At 10 o'clock on the dot, Linda and her boyfriend Russ are at my kiosk. They wait for me to drive away as well. On my way to the party, I stop by a gas station to fill up the tank. As I'm waiting for it to fill, I glance over and see the man from the mall at the mini-mart. He's buying a pack of cigarettes and he looks out of the window and sees me. And when he does, he smiles and waves. He holds up one finger, asking me to wait a minute. I don't. I yank out the fuel hose and jump in my car, booking it out of there. I took several detours before arriving 30 minutes late to the party. I had to make sure that I would lose him before showing up there. It's been a few nights since that happened, and the only reason I'm writing now is because I'm actually working the morning shift, and I just saw him walk out of the Macy's across from me. Linda has someone biking around this half of the mall, so he won't come near me today. But keep me in your thoughts, guys.